6 votes opposed.
On November 14th, 2024, the Treaty Principles Bill was introduced into Parliament by ACT, New Zealand's minority libertarian party. I'd like to add that David Seymour, the leader of ACT, he's ethnically Maori, but none of the leaders of his tribe claim him. And all the research produced about him, always make that a little footnote. I don't know if that's indicative at all of who this guy is. The scene that we just watched was of New Zealand's Member of Parliament Hana Rahiti Maipi-Clark leading a haka in protest to the proposed legislation. When I first watched this clip, I cried. I don't know, it's just such a powerful moment of Indigenous resistance. But I was also surprised that when I tried looking into the context of this video clip, a lot of Western media, especially American media coverage, didn't dive at all into exactly what the bill was or its historical context. So today, I want to unpack what does this bill represent, what are its implications for minority rights, and what are the deeper colonial legacies that it reflects. So what is the Treaty Principles Bill? This bill seeks to refine and replace the Treaty of Waitangi, as it's known in English, or Te Tiriti o Waitangi in Te Ao Maori, which is the Maori language. The treaty, or Te Tiriti, is one of the founding documents of New Zealand and officially made Aotearoa, the Maori word for New Zealand, a British colony. Proponents of the Treaty Principles Bill will argue that the treaty gives special rights and privileges to Maori people. David Seymour says, "It led to the formation of a dual system for New Zealanders, where Maori and white New Zealanders have different political and legal rights." Seymour also says that these misinterpretations of the treaty's meaning have effectively given Maori people special treatment, and the bill is calling for an end to division by race. This is in reference particularly to Article 2 of the treaty, which states that the treaty protects Maori rangatiratanga. Rangatiratanga refers to the chiefly authority over Maori people and the protections of land, forests, fisheries, or other taonanga, which is the Maori word for treasure. As such, the treaty has become a significant and historical document that upholds Maori rights. For example, because of Te Tiriti, Ngāi Tahu are guardians of greenstone in the South Island. Te Ati Awaki Taranaki have used it to push back against pollution in their fishing areas, while the Te Rawawa are working to save the endangered kukupa, or the New Zealand pigeon. The Maori concept of Kaitia Katanga, guardianship of the land, has even influenced legislation like the Resource Management Act of 1991. Thus, as said by Mike Smith, a Maori climate activist, this redefinition proposed by ACT would diminish Maori participation in environmental governance. By limiting these rights, the bill would weaken environmental stewardship practices that are rooted in Maori morals and values, and thereby impact the country's ability to address all the environmental challenges and more particularly combat climate change effectively. This bill then is not one of equality, but rather what I'm going to term colonial entitlement, or what I believe Aokepa meant when they referred to settler selfhood. I want to play a clip from David Seymour himself talking about ACT.
Article, or ture, says that we have the right to tirorangatiratanga, self-determination. Now, some people say that only applies to Māori. I don't see why that wouldn't apply to everybody for a number of reasons. One, as I said, we're all human. Two, many people who are Māori also are proud of many other whakapapa from around the world, so it seems crazy to try and divide the right to self-determination and property to only apply to some citizens. We believe that should apply to all.
In response, I want to read a quote from Aokepa's Affective Kinship. To Kanaka'awi, the land is paramount because it is fundamental to our indigeneity. As our kupuna are buried in the soil, our ancestors become the land that grows our food and the dust we breathe. Kanaka'awi understand ourselves to be descendants and siblings of the land. While the bones of our ancestors are buried in the same land that feeds our families and waits for our bones to be replanted by our descendants, we are birthed of the land in both a metaphorical and a material sense. This is why Mauna Kea is sacred to the Awi. And similarly, for the Maori people, Te Tiriti o Waitangi recognizes Tangata Whenua as stewards of the land, with rights and responsibilities derived deeply from genealogical and cultural ties. Settlers do not have this relationship to the land. They do not have the same stake in this land. So I think that this is a really disgusting characterization to say that the original treaty wasn't referring specifically to the self-determination of Maori people. The guarantee of Rangatiratanga translates as chieftainship with chiefly autonomy, yes, but also inherited from the ancestors and gifted to all Makopuna. That is unique to the Maori indigenous people and not to the settlers. It's also important to consider the context that there have been many breaches of the treaty throughout history that have led to considerable harm to the Maori people. Billions of dollars have been negotiated in settlements over breaches of treaty, particularly relating to the widespread seizure of Maori land. Between 1950 and 2019, about 200,000 children, young people, and vulnerable adults were subjected to physical and sexual abuse in state and church care, and a commission found that children were more vulnerable to the abuse than others. The conversion of Maori to Christianity and the usurping of their resources, notably land, for farming by settlers and the growing dominance of the institutions of the New Zealand state were based on beliefs about the superiority of European civilization and perceived backwardness of Maori culture. Maori schooling was based on the assumption that Maori were capable of becoming westernized as honorary whites. Te Tiriti o Waitangi does not give special rights. It's the least you could fucking do for a people who have been violently dispossessed and slaughtered. I invoke the term self-settlerhood because I think this bill, in the guise of just wanting equality, relies on this idea that the settler is entitled to the land in the same way indigenous people are. It assumes that all citizens begin on this level playing field, ignoring how, as we've seen, settler policies and systems have historically and actively continued to harm Maori people. And all of these breaches have manifested in disparities in health, education, and housing for Maori communities. Another particularly glaring issue with the Treaty Principles Bill is exclusive use of English. The absence of a Te o Reo Maori counterpart should not be written off as an oversight, as we know with readings like Grammars of Animacy and Linguistic Imperialism, language is never a neutral medium. It's deeply tied to power. I want to note how I use the word counterpart instead of version. I think version implies that the Tiriti and the treaty are merely translations of each other. But analyzing it further, these two documents may be both versions of treaties, but they represent completely distinct worldviews. The Te Tiriti guarantees Rangatiratanga to the Maori chiefs. However, it was understood as that translating into the self-determination and guarantee the Maori people have the right to govern themselves. Maori linguistics professor A.V. Hartendorp explains that the Te Tiriti includes the term Kawanatanga, which in historical and linguistic context gives British settlers the opportunity to set up their own government structure to govern their own people, but they would not limit the sovereignty of indigenous people. He continues, quote, "We never ceded sovereignty. We gave a generous invitation to new settlers to create their own government structure and to govern their own people, but they would not limit the sovereignty of indigenous." So, By proposing a bill only in English, the ACT Party perpetuates the colonial framework that privileges Western systems of law and governance while marginalizing indigenous perspectives. Furthermore, the lack of a Te Reo Maori version diminishes the ability of Maori speakers to fully engage with the legislation. And this exclusion has broader implications for environmental governance, cultural preservation, and the recognition of Maori as indigenous people. Concepts like Kaitia Kitanga are essential to understanding the relationship between Maori and their environment, and these principles cannot be adequately conveyed or even comprehended in English alone. Now, this bill is unlikely to get passed, at all. But I think it's still worth talking about because this bill is indicative of the mechanisms of the settler to try to assert its authority over colonized people, an idea that is essential to the maintenance of the settler colonial project. So, unless that conversation is had or the settler colonial state is abolished, a bill like this may not pass today. One like it will surely pass tomorrow.